Come closer, my friend. Let the world grow quiet around you for a little while. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere very old and very far away, to a city by the sea, in the warm dark of the ancient world, where a great lighthouse burned like a low gold star above the water. In that city, long ago, people dreamed a dream almost too large to hold in the hands. They dreamed of gathering every book ever written, every song, every map, every whispered piece of knowledge beneath a single roof. It is a story of wonder, and yes, it is a story of loss. But do not be afraid. There is no dreadful night waiting in it, no sudden fire in the dark, only a slow and gentle fading, the way a candle lowers itself at last into sleep. But before we begin, let us make ourselves comfortable, you and I. Come in from wherever you are and close the door softly behind you. Here in my old library, the fire is already lit, murmuring low in the hearth, and the light of it moves gold and amber along the spines of 1,000 quiet books. There is a chair here, just for you, worn soft over the years. Sink into it. Let your shoulder come down from where they have been holding all day. If the lights around you are still bright, let them go dim now. Loosen whatever needs loosening. Let your breath slow to the pace of the fire. And know this, dear friend, you do not have to stay awake for me. You do not have to follow every word or remember a single name. This is not a lesson. It is only a story, told slowly by an old friend who is glad of your company. If sleep comes to carry you off before the end, let it. You will miss nothing that matters. The story will keep. The fire will keep. And I will still be here, turning the pages long after you have drifted away. So settle in. Let us begin. Our story begins, as so many old stories do, with a young man who wanted the whole world. His name was Alexander, and he was a king of Macedon, far to the north of the warm Mediterranean lands we are visiting tonight. He was still very young when he set out to conquer, and he moved across the ancient world the way a spring flood moves across a valley, swiftly, and changing everything it touched. In time, his marching brought him down into Egypt, that immensely old kingdom of the Nile, older to him than he could truly imagine, its temples already ancient when he was born. And there, on a narrow strip of land between the sea and a quiet lake, where the coast bent gently and the water lay calm and blue, he stopped. Some say he saw at once that this was a place where a great city might stand, sheltered from storms, open to the trade of the whole sea, its harbors deep enough for the ships of every nation. And so, the old accounts tell us, he traced the outline of the city himself, walking the ground and marking where the walls and the wide streets should run. When there was no chalk to mark the lines, the story goes, his men used barley meal from the soldiers' rations to draw the shape of it in the earth, and birds came down and ate the grain, which his seers took softly as a sign that the city would one day feed people from all over the world. Whether that truly happened or whether it is only a lovely thing people said afterward, I cannot promise you. But it is the kind of story a city tells about its own beginning, and I am fond of it. He named the city after himself, as conquerors do, Alexandria. And then, having drawn it in the dust, he went away again to his wars in the east, and he never saw it finished. He died young, far from here, and his great empire having no one strong enough to hold it whole, was divided among his generals like a loaf shared out among tired soldiers. Egypt fell to one of them, a shrewd and patient man named Ptolemy. And it is here, my friend, that our real story quietly begins. For Ptolemy did something that would echo down the long centuries. He did not merely take Egypt as a prize. He founded a line of kings, the Ptolemies, who would rule from Alexandria for nearly 300 years, and he set out to make his new capital not just rich, but radiant, the brightest lamp of learning in all the world. Under his hand and the hands of his sons after him, Alexandria grew and grew. Wide avenues ran straight and cool between white buildings. Ships crowded the two great harbors, their sails like folded wings, and out on a little island called Pharos, joined to the shore by a long causeway, they raised a lighthouse so tall and so bright that sailors could see its fire from far out at sea. One of the wonders of the ancient world, a tower of pale stone with a flame forever burning at its crown, guiding travelers home through the dark. Into this city came people of every kind, Greeks and Egyptians, Jews and Syrians and Persians, merchants and priests and poets, speaking a dozen languages in the marketplaces, trading grain and glass and spices and ideas. It became a place where the whole known world seemed to meet and mingle by the water's edge. But the Ptolemies wanted more than a wealthy city. They wanted a city that would gather not only the goods of the world, but its wisdom. And so they turned their minds to a dream that had never quite been dreamed on such a scale before. Rest here a moment by the fire, and I will tell you what that dream was. The dream was this: to gather in one place all the knowledge in the world, not some of it, not the best of it, all of it, every book, every scroll, every treatise and poem and play and map and medical text that human beings had ever set down, brought together under a single roof so that a person walking its halls might, in principle, read the entire mind of humankind. It is a dream that still makes my old heart beat a little faster, even now, sitting here among my own small shelves. To hold this dream, the Ptolemies built two things, side by side, that we should be careful to tell apart. The first they called the museum. Though you must set aside gently whatever that word means to you now, it was not a hall of glass cases and hushed visitors. The word in the Old Greek was mousion, which means a place of the muses, the 9 goddesses who were said to inspire poetry and music and learning. So the museum was really something more like a home for scholars, a community of thinkers who lived there and dined together and walked together in shaded colonnades and quiet gardens, and were given rooms and meals and a modest income by the king, so that they might spend their days doing nothing but thinking and reading and writing and talking with one another about the nature of the world. Imagine that, my friend. A place where the very finest minds of an age were simply kept, fed and housed and left in peace for no reason but that they might learn. Poets and astronomers, physicians and mathematicians, geographers and grammarians all under one roof, passing one another in the corridors, arguing softly over supper about the size of the moon or the meaning of an old word in Homer. And the second thing they built at the heart of it all was the library. The library was where the books lived. And here I must remind you that a book in those days was not the neat bound thing you might hold in your lap tonight. A book was a scroll, a long sheet of papyrus made from a reed that grew thick along the Nile, its inner pith laid crosswise and pressed and dried into pale golden sheets, then glued end to end and rolled around a wooden rod. To read, you unrolled a little with one hand and rolled up with the other, the words moving past you in narrow columns. And when you were done, you rolled it closed again and slid it back into its nook, a small tag hanging from its edge to say what it was and who had written it. A single long work might fill many scrolls, and the library meant to gather them by the hundreds of thousands. We do not truly know how many it finally held. The old writers give us different numbers, and the numbers do not agree, and some of them are surely too large. The way a fond memory grows in the telling. Some said 40,000 scrolls, some said 400,000, some reached for figures larger still. The honest truth, my friend, is that the exact count is lost to us, and we must simply say that it was vast, vaster than any collection the world had yet seen, so many scrolls that no single person could ever have read them all in a lifetime of trying. To care for such a collection, they appointed a keeper, a chief librarian, chosen from among the greatest scholars of the age. It was a position of high honor, and the men who held it were often tutors to the royal children as well. One of the very first, a careful and orderly soul named Zenodotus, began the long labor of sorting the scrolls, arranging them, deciding which version of an old poem was the true one when several disagreed. And another later, a poet named Callimachus, took on a task so enormous it makes me smile even to think of it. He set out to make a catalog of the entire library, a great list running to 120 scrolls of its own, recording the authors and their works and a little about each, so that a reader might find their way through that ocean of writing. It was, so far as we know, the first true library catalog in all of history. The distant grandfather, if you like, of every card and index and quiet reference desk that has ever helped a wanderer find the one book they were looking for. But a catalog, of course, needs books to catalog. And the way the library gathered its books, well, that is a story all its own, and a rather remarkable one. Let it wait, though, until you have rested a moment more. The fire is warm. There is no hurry at all. So how does one gather all the books in the world? Slowly, my friend, patiently, and it must be said not always gently, for the Ptolemies wanted those scrolls with a hunger that was almost fierce, and they were kings. And kings have ways of getting what they want. The simplest way was to buy. The library sent its agents out across the whole of the known world, to the markets of Athens and Rhodes, to every city where scrolls were sold, with the king's money in their purses and instructions to purchase whatever they could find. And not only the famous works, but the obscure ones too, the forgotten poets and the minor treatises, anything and everything that bore writing worth keeping. Some of the Ptolemies were said to spend on books the way other kings spent on armies. And where there were books to be had, Alexandria's buyers were there, quietly, ready to pay. But buying alone could never fill a library that meant to hold everything, and so they turned to copying, for a book, in those days, could be multiplied only by hand. One patient scribe bent over a desk, reading a line from one scroll and writing it onto another, hour after hour, day after day. The library kept whole rooms of such copyists, and the museum scholars labored to make sure the copies were faithful and correct, comparing versions, weighing one against another, quietly repairing the small wounds that time and careless hands leave in old texts. And then there was the harbor. Here's the tale that has always delighted me most, and I believe there is real truth in it, though as with all old stories, a little of it may have grown fond over the years. It was decreed, so the ancient writers tell us, that every ship which sailed into the great harbor of Alexandria must be searched, not for smuggled gold, not for weapons, but for books. Any scrolls found aboard, whoever owned them and wherever they were bound, were carried up to the library. There they were copied out carefully by the scribes. And then, here is the lovely, faintly outrageous part. The library often kept the original, the true old scroll, for its own shelves, and gave the traveler back a fresh copy in its place, along with, one hopes, its thanks. The books gathered this way were even given a name in the catalogs. They were marked as being from the ships. I find something wonderful in that centuries later, a scholar unrolling a scroll could see the little note and know that this very text had once come down a gangplank in a stranger's baggage and been quietly claimed by a city that could not bear to let any writing pass it by. There is another story of this same hunger, and it is one of my favorites to tell. The great tragedies of Athens, the plays of Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides, the finest that had ever been written, were kept in Athens as a treasure, in an official copy so precious that the city guarded it jealously. And one of the Ptolemies longed to have those true texts for Alexandria. So he asked to borrow them, merely to copy, and Athens agreed, but only against an enormous sum of silver, left with them as a deposit, a promise that the priceless originals would be returned. And do you know what he did? He kept the plays. He let the silver go, a fortune forfeited without complaint, and sent Athens back only handsome copies, and considered it, I think, the finest bargain of his life. For silver a king can always find more of. But the true words of Sophocles, in the hand of those who first set them down, those he would not give back for any price. I will not pretend to you that this was honest. It was not. But oh, I understand it. I understand it in my bones. To hold in your hands the one true copy of something beautiful, and to know that if you let it go, it may be lost, may be burned, may simply crumble in some far-off, careless place. And to feel that here, at least under this roof, among people who love it, it will be safe and read and remembered. A librarian knows that feeling. It is love of a kind, a greedy love perhaps, but love. And so the scrolls came and came and came, bought and copied and borrowed and quietly kept, until the shelves of Alexandria held a great portion of everything the human mind had yet managed to write down. Rest now. In a moment, I will show you some of the people who read there. Let us walk, you and I, very softly, through the shaded halls of the museum, and meet a few of the quiet giants who once worked there. I will not trouble you with many names, only a few, and you need not hold on to any of them. Let them drift past like faces glimpsed in a warm crowd. Here, first, is a man named Eratosthenes, who served as chief librarian in his day. He was the sort of person who was curious about everything, so much so that his friends teased him with a nickname, calling him Beta, the second letter of the Greek alphabet, because they said he was the second best in the world at so many things, and never quite the first at any one. But I think there was more affection than mockery in it, for what he did next was first-rate indeed, and it still takes my breath away. He measured the size of the earth from a library with almost nothing but his mind. He had read, perhaps in one of those very scrolls from the ships, that far to the south, in a town called Cyane, there was a deep well, and that at noon on a certain day of midsummer, the sun shone straight down into it all the way to the water, casting no shadow at all, for the sun stood directly overhead. Yet in Alexandria, on that same day, at that same hour, a tall post did cast a shadow, a small one, but real, and Eratosthenes understood that the difference between that shadow and no shadow at all could only mean one thing, that the surface of the earth curved between the two towns. The world was round, and if he could measure the angle of that little shadow and knew the distance between the two towns, he could work out, by careful reasoning, how large the whole round earth must be. And so he did. And the figure he arrived at all those centuries ago was remarkably, astonishingly close to the truth. Close enough that we, who have flown around the world and seen it whole from above, can only nod in quiet wonder at a man who found nearly the same answer with a stick, a shadow, and a great deal of thought. That is what a library can do, my friend. That is what happens when the knowledge of the world is gathered in one place and a curious mind is set loose among it. Now here is another older figure from the earlier days of the city, a mathematician named Euclid. He too was said to have worked and taught in Alexandria, and he gave the world a book on geometry so clear, so orderly, so beautifully reasoned that it was still being used to teach children more than 2,000 years later. He built it like a great staircase, each step resting firmly on the one below, beginning with a few simple truths so plain that no one could doubt them, and climbing patiently step by careful step to conclusions grand and surprising. There is a gentle old story that a king once asked him whether there might be some quicker, easier road to understanding geometry without all the patient steps. And Euclid answered kindly but firmly that there is no royal road, no shortcut, not even for a king, only the steady, honest climb. I have always loved him for that. And there were others, so many others, moving through those halls across the long years, physicians who studied the human body with a care no one had shown before, astronomers who charted the wandering stars and tried to make sense of their slow dance, geographers who drew the coastlines of the known world, poets who wrote by lamplight, and grammarians who argued sweetly over a single line of verse, a whole living community of the curious, generation after generation, each one leaning on the work of those who came before, each one adding a little more light to the great gathered lamp of human understanding. It could not last forever. Nothing made by human hands ever does. But I do not want to hurry toward the ending, not tonight, not with you so warm and settled there. So let us pause here in the good years, while the lamps still burn and the scholars still walk in the gardens. Rest a while. When you are ready, I will tell you very gently how the light began to fade. And now we come, my friend, to the part of the story that people think they know, and mostly do not. If you have heard anything of the Library of Alexandria, you have likely heard that it burned, that in one terrible night the greatest collection of books in the world went up in flame, and all that knowledge was lost at once in a single catastrophe. It is a vivid picture. It is the kind of thing we remember because it is dreadful and simple and easy to hold in the mind. But the truth, so far as the patient historians can tell us, is quieter than that, and sadder in a gentler way. The library did not die in one night. It faded slowly across a great many years, the way a fire left untended does not explode, but simply sinks and settles and dims, until at last you look over and find that where there were flames, there are only cool gray ashes, and you cannot quite say when the last light went out. There was a fire once, it is true, long into the Ptolemies' reign, when the Roman general Julius Caesar found himself caught up in a war in the streets of Alexandria. A blaze broke out near the harbor, some of his own doing set among the ships, and it spread, and it is said that a great many scrolls were lost to it, whether from the library itself or from warehouses near the docks where books were stored. That was a real wound, but it was not the end. Writers went on speaking of the library and of scholars working there for a long time afterward. The books were hurt, but the dream lived on. What truly undid it was not a single enemy, but time itself, and all the small indifferences that time carries with it. Consider, my friend, what a library truly is. It is not only a room full of scrolls, it is care. It is the copyists who replace the old texts as they wear, for papyrus is a fragile thing and does not last forever in the damp sea air. It grows brittle, it crumbles, and every scroll must be recopied again and again down the generations, or it is quietly lost. It is the kings and patrons who pay for that endless labor. It is the scholars who come and read and keep the whole thing alive by loving it. A library is a living thing, and a living thing must be fed. And over the long centuries, Alexandria was fed less and less. The Ptolemies grew weaker and quarreled among themselves, and some of them cared little for scholarship. There came a time when learned men were driven from the city or no longer welcomed, and the community of the museum thinned. Egypt passed into the hands of Rome, and then Rome itself was troubled by its own long, slow turning. The money grew scarce, the copyists fewer. Riots came and wars, and the shifting of religions and rulers, and each disturbance took its small toll. A wing damaged here, a collection scattered there, scrolls left to the damp and the worm, because no one now had the means or the heart to copy them anew. There were later blows, too, that people sometimes blame for the whole loss. A troubled time when a great temple in the city, which by then held books of its own, was destroyed in an age of religious strife. And later still, when Arab armies took the city, a story that the last books were burned by their command. But the honest scholars tell us these later tales are doubtful, and come from writers living long afterward, and that by the time of them there was likely little great library left to lose. The heart of it had already gone quiet, long before, not with a roar, but with a sigh. And that, I think, is the truest and the saddest shape of it. No villain to blame, no single dreadful night to point to, only neglect and hard times and the slow forgetting of why the thing had mattered, until one day there was simply no great Library of Alexandria anymore, and no one alive who could say exactly when it had ceased to be. Rest now, my friend. The hardest part of the story is behind us. What remains is only quiet. So let us sit together a little longer, you and I, here by the low fire, and think gently about what it was that we lost. For we did lose something, not a building in the end, but the books. Or rather, the books that existed nowhere else. You see, so long as a work was famous and beloved, copied and recopied in libraries all across the ancient world, it could survive the fall of any single collection. Homer was safe. The great tragedies that survived because they were everywhere. But Alexandria's true treasure was never only the famous things. It was the rest, the rare, the obscure, the single surviving copies, the works that lived on those shelves and perhaps nowhere else on earth. And when the library faded, those faded with it, silently, one by one, until they were simply gone. We know a little of what we lost in the strange way that you can know the shape of a missing thing by the space it leaves behind. We have lists, old catalogs, old mentions, of authors and their works, hundreds of them, of which not a single word now survives. We know that certain great poets wrote certain great poems because someone long ago wrote down the titles, and that is all we have, the titles and the silence after them. Sophocles, they say, wrote more than 120 plays. We have seven out of all of them. The rest are names on a list and nothing more. And so it goes across whole libraries of vanished writing, the histories no one can read, the sciences we had to discover all over again, the poems and songs and quiet observations of people long dead who thought perhaps that they were writing for all time. The truth of most of it is lost to us now and will stay lost, and there is no bringing it back. I feel this, my friend, more keenly than I can say, for I too am a keeper of books. I know the weight of a scroll in the hand, the smell of old paper, the particular quiet of a room where knowledge sleeps on the shelves, waiting to be woken by a reader. And I know that everything I love is fragile, that every library, however grand, is only ever one long carelessness away from silence. The people of Alexandria were not fools, and they were not careless all at once. They simply lived, and time passed, and the world changed around them, and the great lamp they had lit was let, little by little, to go out. But I do not want to leave you in sorrow, because here is the other truth, the warmer one, and I want you to carry it with you down into sleep. The dream did not die. The dream of gathering knowledge, of keeping it safe, of setting it where any curious soul might come and read, that dream outlived the library by far. It lives in every library that has ever been built since, in every quiet reading room, in every shelf of well-loved books in a home like yours. It lives, in its small way, in this very room, where the fire burns low and the pages wait. Alexandria is gone, but what Alexandria wanted, that is with us still, and it always will be, so long as there is anyone left who loves a book enough to keep it. And that is enough. So there it is, my friend, the story of the greatest library the ancient world ever knew, and the long, soft fading of its light. Do not carry the loss too heavily. Every candle burns down in the end. That is not a tragedy, only the way of things. What matters is that it was lit at all, that once by a shining sea, people dreamed of holding all the knowledge in the world in their two hands and reached for it, and came nearer than anyone had ever come before. The reaching was real. The wonder was real, and a little of it still warms us now all these centuries later, across the long dark between their time and ours. The fire is very low now. The library is quiet. And you are warm and safe. And there is nothing at all you need to do. If you are still with me, let your eyes close now, if they have not already. Let the names in the harbors and the shining lighthouse drift away like smoke. You need not keep any of them. They will be here, kept safe on the shelf, whenever you should wish to hear them again. I will stay a while, as I always do, turning the pages by the last of the firelight, watching over the quiet. You have nothing to guard and nothing to fear, and nowhere to be but here. Rest now, dear friend. Sleep gently and deeply and well. The books are safe. The fire is warm, and I will keep the library for you until the morning comes. Good night.